one of the things that caught my attention is that you describe this thing that we all do where we become a yes person. What does that mean?
It is when we almost lose an anchor inside of ourselves and we become a yes to the outside world. We become driftwood in the ocean, like we're going in whatever direction the wind is blowing us. And really, it's overwhelming because we don't feel grounded. We don't feel centered. We don't know how we're making decisions. We're just going whichever way the world is going. And boy, these days, the world is going in a lot of directions.
I literally, when you said you're like a driftwood in the ocean going in whatever direction, I thought about my poor husband in our marriage,
Mm,
that I am such an overwhelming force.
mm.
And what you're talking about is that you can become a yes to outside forces and not even realize how much you're doing it. And you lose your ability to make decisions or even to know yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, the goal in the end is to become a sailboat with a rudder that
Mm.
is influenced by the wind, but charts its own course. And so we don't ever want to go so far away from that we're like anchoring ourselves and unable to move and we don't care which way the wind is blowing. We want to care about all of that. And we want to make sure that what we feel is that we have some input into the direction in which we're moving.
I would never have labeled my husband a people pleaser.
Mm,
But when I think about how he kind of goes through life or has until recently, he was very focused on making sure everybody else was okay. And he put himself last.
mhm.
And is that the same thing as people pleasing? Or is people pleasing something else?
So, people pleasing is the moment that you give up what matters to you in order to appease or please somebody else so that you can belong, so that you don't have to confront conflict, so that you can keep that relationship intact. So I think all of these have spectrums, right?
Mm.
What I'd say is, at the end of the day, what you really want is that you're able to take input from the outside world. But when it's time to make a decision, you turn up the voice, the sound of your own heart slightly louder than you can hear the voices of others.
I love you.
And so that's the end, that's really the end way because it's a nuance. We live in a world with other people. We care about each other. It matters to us that we belong. And so to be able to say, oh, someone's a people pleaser or they're not, listen, at the beginning of my life, 100%. First 3.5 decades of my life, 110%, the scale was tipped so far on one side. I'm a healer, right? I'm a doctor. I'm a coach. All of these come from that place. It's such a good intention to
Yes.
serve.
Yes.
But when it goes that far, at least what I learned about myself was that it came from a trauma early on in my life, right? Where I didn't feel like I belonged. And so if I didn't feel like I belonged or I didn't understand what I did wrong, then later on I will almost overcorrect in my life to make sure no one sends me, it was me being sent away with my grandparents when I was really young. And I didn't understand why am I being sent away? For my parents, it's an act of love. But to a child, it felt like, wait, why am I the one being separated? So,
Mm.
how we interpret what happens early on helps us figure out coping mechanisms and strategies that we use to manage that pain or that stress that occurs later on. And I went too far in one direction. What I hope I never lose, Mel, is caring about what the people around me think, what they want, who I'm in partnership with, and what he wants. So I really resonate with your husband because I think that's a lot of me. And I needed to come back more into balance to become who I truly am. And I needed to learn how to sit in the discomfort of another in order to be true to myself.
There are so many things that you have already said that I don't want to go forward yet without stopping and taking some time and unpacking it. I want to make sure you heard Dr. Neha say this image of a sailboat with a rudder and a sail that can use the outside forces to go in a direction that you want, but that you stay centered to yourself. The second thing that I wanted to put a highlighter on is when you describe that story of being a little girl and your parents sent you to live with your grandparents and you didn't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
Can you unpack that for us? Because I had a very similar, like visceral experience when you heard that, when I heard you say that story. I had this visceral image of myself as a little kid going, why are you mad at me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and we'll just see how I do.
Okay.
When I was 3 months old, my parents are immigrants from India. And in 1965, they came here to build a life. I grew up in Michigan, in Grand Blanc, Michigan, and I'm the middle daughter of three. My grandmother, because we're Indian, came over to take care of the children while my parents were both working full time to make ends meet. And so my grandmother was cooking, cleaning. I have an older sister, 18 months older than me. So now there's a newborn, okay? And you can imagine those two little ones in this whole thing. So my grandmother's there. My grandfather gets stationed in the by the UN in Africa to help them with their agriculture. He calls my grandmother and says, I know Neha's 3 months and Rithu's 18 months, but I need you here. I'll do the work of the United Nations project, but I need you to do the social world, which you do so well. My grandmother scooped me up, had a talk with my parents, scooped me up and said, I'm going to take Neha with me. You take care of Rithu. She's potty trained. I'm going to take Neha with me. We're going to have we'll have plenty of resources there and me, and everything's going to be great. And my parents thought, oh my gosh, how amazing.
Right.
Like she'll get the love of her grandmother who was going to be here taking care of her. So they sent me. Fast forward 2 years. And my sister and my mother came to pick me up. Except a 3-month-old didn't know what was happening, but a 2-year-old sure does. And so when they came to pick me up and brought me back, I didn't stop crying for more than a month.
Wow.
I would just wake up, I'd be crying. Where is my Nani and Nana? Where are they? And my parents, who were in their 20s, doing the best they knew how, moving to a new country, all of these things, were beside themselves with this 2-year-old who wouldn't stop crying. It took about a month. And I realized how stubborn I was, because when I was little, I would only call my dad in that time. I'd only call him, hey, you. I wouldn't call him dad. I was like, hey, you potty. Hey, you hungry. Hey, you. But it took about a month of his persistence. I have to give him credit. And I upgraded him to uncle.
Wow.
And I realized after about a month or two that no matter how much I cried, I wasn't going back. And so I better adjust to the environment I'm in. And I began to scan the environment. I mean, I knew what everybody wanted. My mom, my dad, my sister, the Indian community around me, my neighbors. And I became such a good child that when I overheard my dad later on wanting to, he just made a comment like, yeah, the second one was a girl too. Like I wanted a son who was an engineer. And then I heard my mom saying, wow, I missed my calling to become a doctor. I hope one of my girls becomes a doctor. Boy, Mel, my radar was so in tune to everybody else's needs. And the Indian community, in general. It's like, hey, so you're good at math and science? Or are you going to be an engineer or a doctor? So this little girl grew up like a sponge, absorbing the external environment because inside me was too painful. So I checked out and disconnected from myself and tuned into the accolades and love that I could get from going outward.
However you could get them. So can you describe for us just what happened to you and or what you see in your practice so that anybody listening might be able to locate them in this moment where they felt separate and people pleasing became a coping mechanism?
Yeah. I remember being really young, about 7 years old. And, my dad's parents really never taught him about emotions. And so he has a temper that I write about in my book. So my dad's temper, I wanted to figure out why I was getting bullied when I was older. But it was people who were getting really angry and blowing up and telling me to do things.
I think it's those moments that really create this experience where we are uncomfortable with other people's discomfort, or we feel as though we've done something wrong and we knee jerk move into a mode of, how do I make this okay?
How you show up as a leader today is determined, as much determined like by your childhood blueprint as your wardrobe at home influenced what you're wearing today. I want to help deconstruct the invisible connections between their past and their present moment experience. So I traced it back to being about 7 years old in a yellow kitchen, standing kind of behind a plant while my parents were arguing about something. And my dad got really mad. He picked up a plate. It was empty, but a plate, and he smashed it down on the table and it broke. And little 7-year-old, my mom said, Neha, can you please go upstairs, honey? Can you please, I'd like to talk to your father. And so that was my cue to exit left. But I remember it wasn't until 20, 30 years later that I remember saying, oh, wow. I, in that moment, came up with, don't make dad mad, because if you do, this time it was the plate. And if mom wasn't here, next time it would be you, right? Like, I didn't do this consciously, but my little brain went scurrying up the stairs and noted to itself, danger. Anytime someone starts raising their voice, thumping, breaking, slamming cupboards, doors, whatever it is, don't make any more trouble. Get out of there.
Right. I think we all have an experience like that growing up, because because the hardest thing in the world when it comes to yourself is managing your own emotions, both what you're feeling and your ability to tolerate it. And when we went to our, massive audience online and started asking people about people pleasing, the vast majority, 70% of people said, I often say yes when I mean no. And the majority of the time it's at work and with friends. 82% of people responded that they feel constantly stressed, irritated, tired, and impatient. And they attributed it as being related to some conflict that they were avoiding. And you, as a medical doctor, have seen the impact not only in your own life, but with your patients, both when you were practicing as a resident and also in your current practice, the impact of all of this pent up inability to tolerate emotion and then twisting yourself in knots to make everything on the outside okay when you are simultaneously killing yourself on the inside. Is everybody on the planet a people pleaser?
What I would say to you as a doctor is people pleasing makes you physically ill.
Dr. Neha Sangwan, a lot of people feel compelled for a variety of reasons to say yes, 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 yes.
For probably almost 50 years, I was actively saying yes when I meant no.